Please, just give me the food you were going to throw away. The billionaire stopped walking. He had heard beggars ask for money before, but something about this woman's voice made him turn around. She stood outside the luxury London restaurant in a worn coat, her hair disheveled, her hands trembling from hunger. Daniel Whitmore looked at her for only a few seconds. Then he froze. Not because she looked familiar, because she knew his name. Daniel. His face changed. Nobody on that street knew who he was. He slowly stepped toward her. How do you know my name? The woman stared at him. Her eyes filled with tears. Then she whispered something that made the billionaire's entire world stop. Because I was the one who gave you that name. Daniel's heart pounded. Impossible. His mother had disappeared 28 years ago. Everyone had told him she was gone. Some said she had abandoned him. Others said she had died. Daniel had spent millions trying to find her. And now, the homeless woman standing in front of him was claiming to be his mother. He stared at her face. What's my mother's name? The woman swallowed hard. Eleanor. Daniel stepped backward. That was the name. The name only his family knew. But there was something even more terrifying. The woman reached into her worn coat and pulled out a tiny faded photograph. Daniel looked at it. His breath disappeared. It was a photograph of him as a little boy, being held by the woman standing before him. His billionaire world suddenly felt meaningless, because the woman begging him for his leftovers might be the mother he had spent half his life searching for. But Daniel still had one question. If she really was his mother, why had she disappeared? Daniel couldn't move. The woman stood before him, clutching the faded photograph against her chest. Where did you get that? He asked. She looked down at it. This was taken the day you turned 6. Daniel's expression hardened. That is impossible. The woman slowly turned the photograph toward him. There he was. A little boy in a blue sweater. And beside him stood a younger woman with the same eyes Daniel had seen every morning in his own mirror. His mother. Daniel had carried a photograph of that day for nearly 3 decades. But his copy had been lost years ago. How do you know about this picture? The woman looked directly into his eyes. Because I was there. Daniel's heart raced. He wanted to believe her. But he had learned long ago that desperation could make people say anything. He pulled out his phone. Wait here. The woman lowered her eyes. Are you going to call the police? Daniel stopped. No. Then why are you calling someone? Someone who can tell me whether you're lying. Minutes later, Daniel's private driver arrived. Daniel quietly instructed him to take the woman to a nearby private clinic, not because she was sick, but because he wanted her somewhere safe while he investigated. As the car drove away, Daniel stared at the photograph. There was something written on the back. He turned it over. His fingers suddenly went cold. For words were written in faded handwriting. For my little Daniel. Daniel knew that handwriting. He had seen it only once before. On the birthday letter his father had kept locked away for years. His mother wasn't just claiming to be his. She knew things only his family could know. But Daniel still needed proof. And the next clue would come from someone who had known his mother before she disappeared. Daniel returned to his mansion before midnight. He didn't sleep. Instead, he went straight to the oldest room in the house. His father's study. Everything was still there. The leather chair. The old books. The locked cabinet. And the woman who had worked for his family for more than 30 years. Mrs. Carter. Daniel placed the photograph on the desk. Do you recognize her? Mrs. Carter looked at it. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then her hand went to her mouth. Where did you get this? Just answer me. Mrs. Carter looked at Daniel. That's your mother. The room became silent. Daniel's voice dropped. Are you sure? I could recognize her anywhere. Daniel placed another photograph beside it. His mother as a young woman. Then another. The homeless woman from the street. Mrs. Carter's eyes filled with tears. Daniel, where is she? I found her tonight. Mrs. Carter stood completely still. Where? Outside a restaurant. Mrs. Carter's face changed. Did she tell you her name? Daniel hesitated. She said it was Eleanor. Mrs. Carter closed her eyes. Eleanor. The name nobody in the Whitmore household had spoken aloud for years. Daniel leaned forward. Mrs. Carter, I need the truth. She looked frightened. What truth? Why did my mother disappear? Mrs. Carter's lips trembled. I don't know everything. But you know something. Silence. Daniel's voice became softer. Please. Mrs. Carter finally walked toward the old cabinet. She pulled out a small wooden box. Daniel had never seen it before. She placed it on the desk. This was left behind the night your mother disappeared. Daniel stared at it. Why didn't you give it to me? Your father told me never to. Daniel's eyes narrowed. My father. Mrs. Carter nodded. Daniel opened the box. Inside was a small silver necklace, a folded letter, and an old hospital bracelet. He picked up the letter. His hands began to shake. The envelope had his name on it. Daniel. But before he could open it, Mrs. Carter whispered, Your mother didn't abandon you. Daniel froze. What did you say? Mrs. Carter looked straight at him. She was trying to come back. Daniel slowly lowered the letter. Then why didn't she? Mrs. Carter's eyes filled with tears. Because someone made sure you would never find her. Daniel stared at her. The room suddenly felt smaller. Who? Mrs. Carter looked toward the locked study door. And whispered, That is the part your father made me promise never to tell you. Daniel's grip tightened around the letter. For 28 years, he had believed his mother had simply disappeared. Now he was beginning to realize. Someone had wanted her gone. Daniel stared at the envelope. His name was written across it in handwriting he had spent years trying to remember. He slowly opened it. The letter was short. But the first sentence nearly took his breath away. My dear Daniel, if you are reading this, then something has happened that I prayed would never happen. Daniel stopped. Mrs. Carter stood silently across the room. He continued. I need you to know one thing before you believe anything anyone tells you. Daniel's eyes moved across the page. I never left you. His breathing changed. The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. I was taken away from you. Daniel lowered the letter. Taken. Mrs. Carter looked down. Daniel continued reading. Your father believes I am trying to destroy the life he built. He doesn't understand why I have been fighting for you. Daniel froze. His father had always told him the same story. His mother had become unstable. She had abandoned the family. She had chosen to leave. But the letter told a completely different story. Eleanor had been fighting for something. For Daniel. Then Daniel reached the final paragraph. If one day you find me, don't ask why I disappeared first. He stared at the sentence. Ask who made it impossible for me to return. Daniel's hand trembled. The letter ended with 3 words. I love you. Daniel closed his eyes. For 28 years, he had believed his mother had walked away. Now he knew she had been trying to come back. He looked at Mrs. Carter. Where did my father send her? Mrs. Carter hesitated. Answer me. I don't know where he sent her. But you know something. Mrs. Carter finally nodded. After your mother disappeared, your father gave me instructions. What instructions? Never speak her name around you. Daniel's face hardened. Why? Because he said you were too young to understand. Daniel stared at her. And you believed him? Mrs. Carter's voice broke. I was afraid of losing my job. Daniel looked away. Then something caught his attention. There was an address written faintly at the bottom of the letter. A London shelter. Daniel immediately recognized the name. It was still operating. And suddenly, the question wasn't whether his mother had survived. The question was, how long had she been waiting for him to find her? The next morning, Daniel drove through the rain. He didn't take his luxury car. He didn't bring security. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He needed answers. When he arrived at the shelter, a volunteer led him into a quiet room. Then the door opened. Eleanor walked in. Daniel stood. Neither spoke. For several seconds, they simply stared at each other. 28 years disappeared in that moment. Daniel finally whispered, "Is it really you?" Eleanor's lips trembled. "Yes." Daniel looked at her face. Older, tired, but unmistakably familiar. He wanted to run toward her. He wanted to embrace her. But another part of him was angry. "Why didn't you come back?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I tried. 28 years. I tried every way I could. Then why was I told you abandoned me?" Eleanor lowered her head. "Because your father made sure you believed that." Daniel stepped backward. "Why?" Eleanor looked at him. "Because he believed I was going to take you away from him." Daniel's face changed. "Take me?" He had lost control of his business. Everything was collapsing. He believed I was responsible. "But you weren't." "No." "Then why didn't you fight him?" Eleanor looked toward the window. "I did." Her voice became quieter. And that was when everything changed. She explained that after Daniel's father threatened to use his influence to keep her away from her son, Eleanor tried to seek legal help. But before she could return for Daniel, she was forced into circumstances that left her without money, without support, and eventually without a stable home. She survived one day at a time. And every time she came close to finding Daniel, something stopped her. Daniel listened in silence. Then Eleanor reached into her coat. She pulled out a small wooden pendant. Daniel recognized it immediately. He had worn its matching piece around his neck as a child. His mother had given it to him on his 6th birthday. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "You kept it?" Eleanor smiled through her tears. "Every day." Daniel finally broke. He crossed the room and embraced her. Eleanor held her son tightly. For the first time in 28 years, Daniel heard the words he had secretly waited his entire life to hear. "My little boy." Daniel closed his eyes. "I looked for you." "I know." "How?" Eleanor pulled away. "Because I was looking for you too." Daniel wiped his face. Then he remembered something. The photograph. The letter. The necklace. Everything suddenly connected. But there was still one piece missing. Daniel looked at his mother. "Why did you ask me for leftovers last night?" Eleanor hesitated. Then she answered. "Because I didn't know you were the man who owned that restaurant." Daniel stared at her. Eleanor continued. "I saw you walk out. I didn't recognize you at first." Daniel's eyes widened. "But then you turned around." She touched his face. "And I saw my little boy." Daniel couldn't speak. The billionaire who had spent millions searching for his missing mother had finally found her. Not in a mansion. Not in a private hospital. Not at some grand family estate. He found her standing in the rain, asking for food. But Daniel still didn't know the final truth. Because Eleanor had one more secret. And this one would change everything he thought he knew about his father's disappearance. Daniel couldn't let it go. There was still one question burning inside him. "Mother, what really happened to Dad?" Eleanor's expression changed. For a moment, she looked toward the window. Then she whispered, "Your father didn't know where I was." Daniel stared at her. "What?" "He thought I had disappeared." Daniel shook his head. "But you just told me he forced you away." "I said he believed I was trying to take you from him. I never said he knew what happened afterward." Daniel's confusion deepened. Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out an old envelope. "This was delivered to me years after I left." Daniel opened it. Inside was a letter from his father. His hands trembled as he read. "Eleanor, I have spent years believing you abandoned our son. I was wrong." Daniel stopped. His eyes moved down the page. "I searched for you after I learned the truth. But by then, every trail had disappeared." Daniel looked at his mother. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I never received the letter until years later." Daniel continued reading. His father's final words were simple. "If Daniel ever finds you, tell him I was wrong. Tell him I loved him. And tell him that pride cost me the family I was trying so desperately to protect." Daniel slowly lowered the letter. His father had died years ago. All this time, Daniel had carried anger toward a man who had already died, believing he had failed his family. Eleanor reached for his hand. "Daniel, you don't have to carry his mistakes anymore." Daniel looked at her. "What about yours?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I made mistakes too." She paused. "I should have fought harder. I should have found another way. I should never have allowed shame to keep me silent." Daniel looked down. Then he remembered the night before. His mother standing outside the restaurant, asking for leftovers, not knowing the wealthy man she was speaking to was her own son. Daniel suddenly understood something. He had spent years searching for his mother. But perhaps God had been preparing both of them for this exact moment. Not when Daniel was a child. Not when Eleanor was young. But now, when both of them were finally ready to forgive. Daniel folded the letter. Then he stood. "Come home." Eleanor stared at him. "Daniel." "Come home, Mum." She began to cry. But Daniel wasn't finished. "Not because I feel sorry for you." He gently took her hand. "Because you're my mother." And for the first time in 28 years, Eleanor believed she had finally come home. The Whitmore mansion had never been this quiet. Daniel opened the front door. Eleanor stood behind him. She stared at the magnificent house. For years, she had imagined her son living somewhere beyond her reach. She never imagined she would one day walk back into his home beside him. Daniel turned toward her. "Are you ready?" Eleanor smiled through her tears. "I've been waiting 28 years. They stepped inside. Mrs. Carter was waiting. The moment she saw Eleanor, she covered her mouth. "Eleanor." Eleanor smiled. "Hello, Margaret." Mrs. Carter rushed forward. The two women embraced. There were no explanations. No accusations. Only tears. Later that evening, Daniel prepared a simple dinner. Not a luxurious banquet. Not a gathering of businessmen. Just 3 people around one table. Daniel looked at his mother. "Do you remember what you asked me for that night?" Eleanor smiled. "Your leftovers." Daniel laughed softly. "You were asking the billionaire for food." Eleanor shook her head. "I didn't know you were a billionaire." Daniel smiled. "And I didn't know the woman asking me for food was my mother." They laughed. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then Daniel placed his hand over Eleanor's. "I spent years thinking I needed to find you." Eleanor looked at him. "And now?" Daniel looked toward the ceiling. "Now I think God was bringing us back to each other." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She reached for his hand. "Then let's thank him." They bowed their heads. And Daniel prayed. "Father, thank you for giving me back what I thought I had lost forever. Help me forgive. Help me love. And never let me become so wealthy that I forget the people who are hurting around me." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Amen." Months later, Daniel made a decision that surprised everyone. He created a foundation dedicated to helping homeless mothers and families rebuild their lives. But he didn't name it after himself. He named it after his mother. The Eleanor Whitmore Foundation. And Eleanor became its first volunteer. She understood what it meant to stand outside a restaurant with nothing. She understood what it meant to be overlooked. And she understood how powerful one small act of kindness could be. One evening, Daniel watched his mother serve meals to struggling families. A young girl approached her. "Are you the owner?" Eleanor smiled. "No, sweetheart." "Then who are you?" Eleanor looked across the room at Daniel. He was smiling. She turned back to the girl. "I'm someone's mother." The girl smiled. And Eleanor hugged her. Daniel stood quietly watching. 28 years ago, he had lost his mother. He thought she was gone forever. Then one rainy evening, a homeless woman approached him and asked for the food he was about to throw away. He almost walked past her. But he turned around. And that decision changed everything. Sometimes God hides a miracle inside an ordinary encounter. Sometimes the person you overlook carries a story you know nothing about. And sometimes, what you think is the end of a story is actually the beginning of restoration. Daniel thought he was giving leftovers to a stranger. Instead, he found his mother. He thought he was rescuing someone from hunger. But in the end, God was restoring his family. And perhaps that's the lesson. Never let wealth make you blind to people. Never let pride prevent forgiveness. And never assume that someone has been forgotten simply because the world has stopped looking for them. Because when God decides to restore what was lost, even 28 years cannot stop him. Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they have done. Proverbs 19 verse 17.